Signed at dawn on the 5th of September, 1889, the paper lay on Caleb Drennan's kitchen table, with the ink still damp and two names scratched below a single paragraph that neither party read twice. Hattie Marsh read it once, pressed her thumb beside her signature, as though sealing a letter, and set the pen down without ceremony. 6 months of wages, room and board provided, care of the child and the household, no clause beyond that. She had agreed to it the way a sensible woman agrees to weather, not because it pleased her, but because it was what stood between her and a harder thing. Caleb folded the paper and put it in the tin box on the shelf above the stove. He did not look at her when he spoke. "Breakfast is at 5. Elsa wakes before that, most mornings. Then I'll be up before 5, Hattie said. She doesn't take to strangers easy." Hattie looked at the closed door of the back room, from behind which she could already hear the faint sound of a child turning in sleep. "Most people don't," she said. "She'll come around." Caleb said nothing to that. He put on his hat and went out to the barn, and Hattie stood alone in the kitchen of a house she did not yet know, with a cast-iron stove that needed feeding, and a window that faced east, and a contract that gave her exactly 6 months to prove herself useful. She was not thinking about love. She was thinking about firewood. That was how it started, not with longing or with hope or with any of the feelings the novels stacked on the shelves of the Caldwell County Lending Library might have prescribed. It started with a cold stove and a sleeping child, and a man who had said perhaps 14 words to her in the 3 days since the arrangement was proposed. It started the way most honest things start on the frontier, quietly, without flourish, in the gray light before sunrise, with work already waiting and no one to tell you it would be all right. Hattie rolled up her sleeves and lit the stove. The town of Grover's Bend, Idaho, was not large enough to keep a secret, and it was not kind enough to stop trying to make one out of nothing. By the time Hattie had been at the Drennan place for 4 days, the women at Abelman's Dry Goods had already formed an opinion. She heard it second-hand from the girl who delivered milk, a loose-limbed girl of about 16 named Dot, who had no malice in her but also no filter between her thoughts and her mouth. "Mrs. Abelman says it isn't proper," Dot reported, setting the can on the porch step. A widow woman, living in a widower's house with no preacher's word over it. "Mrs. Abelman isn't feeding Elsa's breakfast," Hattie said, and took the milk inside. It was not that the gossip didn't sting. It did, in the particular way that gossip always stings a woman who has already lost something. Hattie had lost a husband to a mining accident 2 winters past, her savings to the debts he'd left behind, and her rented room in Boise to a landlord who hadn't waited 2 weeks before filling it again. She had arrived at Grover's Bend with a carpet bag and a letter of reference from the Reverend Stokes of the Second Methodist Church, and she had answered Caleb Drennan's notice in the Caldwell County Gazette because it was the most honest offer she'd read in 6 months of reading notices. Housekeeper wanted, widower, 1 daughter, age 4, fair wages, references required. She had not expected much from him, and in that she had been accurately calibrated. Caleb Drennan was a tall man with the kind of face that had been weathered into stillness, dark-haired and wide through the shoulder, with hands that looked like they'd been built for something harder than they currently held, which most mornings was a tin cup of coffee and a silence that filled the whole kitchen. He ran a modest cattle operation on 160 acres east of town, employed 2 hands named Fitch and Orvie, who slept in the bunkhouse, and had been raising his daughter alone for 14 months, since Clara Drennan died of a fever that the doctor in Caldwell City had not reached in time. Elsa, 4 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes, and a disposition toward silence that was both heartbreaking and, Hattie suspected, entirely learned. The child watched everything. She had not said a single word to Hattie in 4 days. Not a greeting, not a complaint, Not even a sound when she scraped her knee on the porch step and sat with her lip pressed tight rather than cry. "Does she talk?" Hattie asked Caleb on the fifth morning, when Elsa had eaten her oatmeal and gone to sit on the floor near the window with a wooden horse that had one leg missing. "She talks," he said. "To you?" A pause. "Some. She hasn't said a word to me." "I know," he set his cup down. "Give her time." Hattie looked at the child, who was pressing the three-legged horse across the floorboards with intense concentration. "Is there another leg for that horse somewhere?" she asked. "I can whittle." Caleb looked up then, genuinely surprised, as though she had said something in a language he hadn't expected her to know. "You can whittle?" "My father taught me. I'm not fine about it, but I can manage a leg." He looked at her for a moment, then looked at Elsa, then back at her. "I'll find the scrap box," he said. It was the most he had offered her yet. Hattie counted it. The leg took her 3 evenings of work by lamplight, and on the 4th she fitted to the peg with a spot of pine tar and handed the horse to Elsa without comment, setting it on the edge of the table where the child would find it at breakfast. She watched from across the room as Elsa picked it up, turned it over, pressed each leg against the table in sequence to confirm they all held. Then the child looked up and directly at Hattie for the first time. She didn't say anything, but she looked. Hattie counted that too. October came in cold, the way Idaho cold comes, not gradually but all at once, as though a door had been shut somewhere to the north, and no one had thought to warn the valley. Hattie put extra quilts on Elsa's bed and dragged a second braided rug from the storage room to lay beside it, so the child's feet would not hit bare boards in the dark of the morning. She began cooking heavier, salt pork and bean soup, cornbread with crackling, potatoes fried in drippings, the kind of food that put warmth in you and kept it there through a working day. Fitch and Orvie, who ate supper at the house on Tuesdays and Fridays, began to arrive 3 minutes early on those evenings. Caleb noticed. He didn't say so, but one Friday after the men had gone back to the bunkhouse and Elsa was in bed, he paused at the kitchen door on his way out and said, "That was good. Tonight, the soup." "There's more in the pot," Hattie said. She was washing bowls. "I ate enough. Then save it for lunch tomorrow." He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. "You don't have to cook for them," he said. "Fitch and Orvie. That wasn't part of the agreement." "No," she said, "it wasn't." She kept washing. He went out. She could hear his boots on the porch boards, slow and deliberate, and then the sound of him stopping and not going any farther for a moment, just standing in the cold, before he finally crossed to the bunkhouse to settle whatever needed settling before dark. She didn't know what to make of that pause. She filed it away beside the scrap wood, and the surprised look, and Elsa's first direct gaze, in the part of her mind where she kept the things that hadn't yet resolved into meaning. Hattie was not a woman who rushed meaning. The frontier had taught her that much. Things revealed themselves in their season, or they didn't, and either way the work was the same in the morning. She hung the bowls and banked the stove and went to bed. Snow came on the 3rd of November, not a light dusting but a real fall, 6 inches by midnight with more coming. Hattie woke at 4 to the sound of Elsa coughing, a thin, papery sound that filled the small house with a particular dread, the kind that every frontier woman knew, because fever took children the way winter took the unprepared, without warning and without mercy. She was across the hall and in the child's room before she was fully awake, her hand on Elsa's forehead before she had thought to reach for her wrapper. The child was warm, too warm. "Hattie," Elsa said. It was the first word she had ever spoken to her. Hattie felt something shift in her chest, something that had been held tightly in place by the practical terms of a 6-month contract, and she pressed it back down with deliberate care, because this was not the moment for it. "I'm here," she said. "I've got you." She built the fire up high, heated water, set a poultice to steep from the dried herbs she had brought in her carpet bag, horehound and thyme, what her own mother had used. She sent Fitch, who was already awake from the snow, to ride for the doctor in Caldwell City, though she did not wait for the doctor before she began. She sat on the edge of Elsa's bed and held the child's hand and sang the 2 hymns she knew all the way through, and one she only half remembered, and Elsa, between spells of coughing, gripped her fingers with a strength that made Hattie think, "Good, there is fiber in this girl, there is fight." Caleb appeared in the doorway at 4:30, fully dressed, having heard it all. He looked at his daughter, and then at Hattie, and then at the orderly things she had already arranged. The water, the herbs, the extra blanket folded just so, and something in his face that had been clenched a long time seemed to ease, just slightly, like a fist opening one finger at a time. He sat on the other side of Elsa's bed. He didn't ask what to do. He reached over and took Elsa's other hand. The 3 of them stayed that way while the snow kept falling outside, and the fire crackled, and the herbs turned the air of the small room sweet and medicinal and close. The doctor arrived by 10 o'clock and confirmed what Hattie already knew. A hard cold, not the fever, manageable with care and warmth and rest. He complimented the poultice. He did not ask who Hattie was, which she supposed meant the gossip had reached even Caldwell City. By noon, Elsa was sleeping peacefully, her temperature down, both legs of the wooden horse clutched in one small fist. Caleb found Hattie in the kitchen, reheating the soup from the day before. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before he said anything. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual and careful, the way a man speaks when he is picking words that matter. "I should have said it before," he said. "She's been alone, since Clara, in the way a child gets alone when—" He stopped. "I know," Hattie said. "I thought it would be enough, me and the work and the men." A pause. "It wasn't enough. It kept her alive," Hattie said. "That was enough for that season. This is a different season." He was quiet a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the light through the kitchen window was the particular white gold of a November midday after a fall, clean and bright and very cold. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the morning she mentioned whittling, as though she had said something in a language he had not expected to hear. "I'm glad you answered the notice," he said. Hattie stirred the soup. "The wages were fair," she said, which was true, and also was not the whole truth, and they both understood that, standing in the quiet kitchen with the child sleeping safely down the hall. She did not say the rest. Not yet. There were still 3 months left on the contract. But she counted the moment. She counted it carefully. December brought its complications in the form of a man named Aldous Burr, who rode out from Grover's Bend on a Tuesday with a surveyor and 2 men Hattie didn't recognize, and who informed Caleb, standing at the property gate in a coat that cost more than most men earned in a month, that the eastern water rights on the Drennan claim had been purchased by the Meridian Land and Water Consortium, a company Burr represented with the smooth confidence of a man who had delivered bad news before and found it profitable. Hattie watched from the kitchen window. She could not hear the words, but she could read the shape of the conversation well enough. Burr's easy gestures, the surveyor's notes, Caleb's stillness, which was a different kind of stillness from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was a man at rest. This was a man holding himself in check the way you hold a gate against the wind, with effort and with purpose. Fitch told her later what had been said. Without those water rights, the eastern pasture could not be run through summer. Without the eastern pasture, the herd would need to be cut by a third. A third of the herd was the difference between a modest livelihood and debt. "He's got 30 days to contest it," Fitch said, "if he can prove prior use." "Can he prove it?" Fitch looked uncertain. "He'd need records, and a lawyer. Lawyers in Caldwell City don't come cheap. Hattie thought about the tin box on the shelf above the stove. That evening, after Elsa was in bed, Hattie set a cup of coffee in front of Caleb and sat down across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where the contract had been signed 4 months ago, and said, "Tell me what you need." He looked at her. "It's not your trouble." "You're not wrong," she said. "Tell me anyway." He told her. He told her about the water rights and the records he needed, and the fact that the deed registry in Caldwell City held documentation of his father's original filing that would establish prior use if someone could get to it and copy it correctly, which required a person who could read legal script without error, and who could argue the point to a clerk who was likely already in Burr's pocket. Hattie could read legal script. She had worked 2 years as a copy clerk for a land office in Boise before her marriage. She had not mentioned it because it had not seemed relevant. She mentioned it now. The look on Caleb's face went through several things in quick succession: surprise, then something like relief, then the stubborn set of a man who did not want to accept help and was fighting himself about it. "You'd have to go to Caldwell City," he said. "I've been there. In winter, it's a hard ride." "Caleb," she said his name with enough evenness that it stopped him, "I have sat behind a legal desk in a building full of men who thought a woman couldn't read a property filing. I have managed. Tell me what you need on the document." He told her. Then, quietly, he said, "Why would you do that? It's not in the contract." Hattie looked at him. She thought about the tin box and the paper inside it, and the paragraph neither of them had read twice. She thought about a 4-year-old girl who had said her name in the dark of a November morning like it was a thing she'd been saving. "The contract," she said, "is a piece of paper. Elsa is not a piece of paper." She rode to Caldwell City on a Thursday with Orvie as escort, and she sat in the deed registry for 4 hours in a chair that was designed to discourage lingering, and she found the original Drennan filing and copied it in a hand so clear and correct that the clerk, who had indeed been suspicious of her, ended up reading over her shoulder with something approaching respect. She had the certified copy back in Caleb's hands by Sunday. The attorney Caleb hired took one look at it and said the case was sound. Burr's men did not come back. Christmas passed quietly. Hattie made gingerbread from a recipe she carried in her head, and Elsa stood on a stool beside her at the counter and pressed the cutter into the dough with both hands, and a seriousness of purpose that Hattie recognized as inherited from her father. Caleb came in from the cold and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the two of them, his daughter on the stool, flour on her nose, looking up at Hattie for the next instruction, and he stood there longer than a man just warming himself would stand. Elsa saw him and held up a gingerbread shape. "Papa, look, a horse." "I see it," he said. "Hattie made the legs the right length," Elsa said. "She's good at legs." Hattie kept her eyes on the dough. She could feel him looking at her. "She is," he said. "She's good at a lot of things." January hardened everything: the ground, the air, the long silences between dusk and full dark when the house settled around its own warmth and the world outside had no use for human plans. Elsa had taken to spending evenings in the kitchen while Hattie sewed or mended, sometimes asking questions, sometimes only sitting with her wooden horse walking slow circles on the tabletop. Caleb would come in from the last check of the animals and pour his coffee and stand near the stove, and the three of them would be quiet together in a way that had stopped feeling like 3 separate people and started feeling like something with a shape. Hattie noticed it the way you notice a season changing, not in a single moment but in the accumulation of small ones. The way Caleb had started setting a second cup on the shelf beside his own before he poured. The way Elsa had started leaving the wooden horse on Hattie's side of the table when she went to bed, so it would be there when Hattie sat down in the morning. The way the house had begun to feel when she walked through it, less like a place she was contracted to maintain and more like a place she would grieve to leave. The contract ended on the 5th of March. She knew he knew this. She had not raised it, and neither had he, and the silence around it had grown a particular texture, charged, careful, the way air feels before a storm. It was Elsa who broke it, in the way that children do, without any awareness of what she was navigating. On the 1st of March, at breakfast, Elsa looked up from her oatmeal and said, with no preface, "You're staying, aren't you, Hattie?" Hattie looked at her. Then she looked at Caleb, who was looking at his coffee cup. "I don't know yet," Hattie said honestly. "Papa," Elsa addressed this to the coffee cup too, apparently understanding that was where the relevant party was located. "Tell her she's staying." Caleb looked up. He met Hattie's eyes for a long, level moment. Outside the window, the first pale light of a late winter morning was coming in, thin and clear, the sky the color of creek water before sunrise. "I'd like to talk to you," he said to Hattie, privately, after Elsa's down tonight. She nodded. After supper, after the dishes, after Elsa had been tucked in with the horse beside her pillow, Hattie sat at the kitchen table and waited. Caleb came in and sat across from her, the same seats as every document, every discussion, every practical exchange of the past 6 months. He put his hands on the table, not folded, just set there, like a man laying out what he has. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know," she said. "I kept thinking the contract was enough, that I could just renew it if you were willing, keep things as they were. But," he looked at her directly, "but I don't want to renew the contract," he said. "I want to tear it up." Hattie waited. "Elsa needs you," he said, "and so do I, and I am—" He stopped, tried again. "I am not asking you to stay as a housekeeper, Hattie. I am asking you to stay as—" He pressed his lips together. "I am asking you to stay." The word he had not said sat between them, plain and enormous. She could see it cost him to have come this far, and she understood that because it cost her something too, to want something again, to let the wanting be visible. Loss teaches you to hold your wanting at a distance. Hattie had learned that lesson very well. But she looked at this man, his steady hands on the table, his face that had weathered into honesty, the flower that was still, she noticed, faintly on his sleeve from helping Elsa with her oatmeal this morning. And she thought about the second cup on the shelf, and the contract in the tin box, and a little girl's voice in the dark saying her name like it was a thing saved up. "I would need the contract rewritten," she said. He blinked. If I stay as more than what the paper says, then I need the paper to say so." She kept her voice steady. "I am not a woman who does things halfway, Caleb." "I don't know how." A slow look crossed his face, something between surprise and warmth, and then something that was simply recognition. "No," he said. "I don't think you do." He went to the shelf. He took down the tin box. He opened it and set the paper on the table between them, and then he looked at her, and she looked at him, and she reached out and drew a line under the last clause, the way a woman draws a line when she is adding something that was left out. Caleb watched her do it. Then he reached for the pen. He wrote 2 words. He set the pen down. She read what he had written. Then she looked up at him. "That'll do," she said. He nodded. His mouth did something at one corner that was not quite a smile, but was the shape a smile comes from. "The preacher in Grover's Bend," he said. "He does Saturdays." "Tell him to make it early," Hattie said. "Elsa will be up before 5. Reverend Alcott, who was plain-spoken and efficient and had been hoping for this particular occasion since November, married them on a Saturday morning in March with the remnant of winter still on the ground and the first green pressure of spring pushing up through the mud at the edge of the yard. Elsa stood between them in her best dress and held one hand of each. She was not the flower girl. She had not been asked to play a part. She simply put herself there, in the middle, where she had decided she belonged. and nobody corrected her. The wind off the valley was cold and smelled of wood smoke and pine, and the coming thaw. Hattie felt it on her face and thought of all the mornings she had not expected, the stove she had not known she would light, the child she had not known she would love, the man across from her, whose hands she now knew the shape of the way you know the shape of a place you have lived. Caleb held her hand through the whole of it, and when the Reverend was done, he did not let go. Fitch and Orvie were there. Dot from the milk route was there, crying cheerfully. Mrs. Abelman was there, and had brought a cake, which Hattie counted as a full surrender. After, when they were home, Elsa went to the kitchen shelf and brought down the tin box without being asked, and set it on the table in front of Hattie with the ceremony of a child presenting something precious. "For keeping," she said. Hattie took the box. Inside, under the old contract with its added line, was the scrap of paper with the 2 words Caleb had written on the 1st of March. She had kept it. She looked at it once more and then closed the lid. On the shelf above the stove, where the box had lived for 6 months, Caleb had set 2 cups, not side by side, as you'd set 2 objects, but angled toward each other, as though in conversation. Hattie left them that way. She thought about a line in a contract that had started as 6 months and become a life, and about all the things that begin not with grand declarations but with practical terms and honest hands. She thought about how a child knows things that adults talk themselves out of knowing. She thought about how a frontier woman packs her carpet bag for a job and finds something she hadn't the good sense to look for. There is no wisdom in waiting for the perfect moment to begin. The frontier never offered perfect moments. It offered cold mornings and hard ground and honest work and, if you were lucky and willing, a hand to hold through the middle of it. Hattie Drennan had been all of those things, and she had walked through a door marked only with a job and wages, and she had found, on the other side, that home is not a place you arrive at. It is a thing you build, one careful act at a time, until one morning you look up and see that you are standing in the middle of it and cannot remember when it started, and cannot imagine where else you would be. If you have ever kept a bargain that turned into something more, if you have ever written your name on a practical thing and found, at the end of it, that your heart was in the ink, then you know what Hattie knew, standing in that kitchen with the March wind coming under the door, and a child's wooden horse on the table, and 2 cups angled toward each other on the shelf. Some promises begin in practicality and end in grace. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. If this story found its way to something true in you, leave a word in the comments. Tell us about a time a simple agreement changed the direction of your life, or a moment when a child saw something clearer than all the grown folks around her. We would love to hear it. And if you want to walk the frontier trails again, through stories of grit and grace and love that earns its name, subscribe, and we'll have another one waiting for you. Good night. God bless you and everyone you're keeping warm.